Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode, we will be covering the Abbasid Caliphate, and we will highlight a specific leader from each, and from the Abbasid Caliphate, we will highlight Huran al-Rashid, and we'll also highlight the Caliphate of Córdoba and Abd al-Rahman III. So we will cover an empire, a significant leader from that empire, another empire, a significant leader from that empire. So two pairs of empires and two pairs of leaders. And at the very end, we will have a comparison of the two leaders in the style of Plutarch's Parallel Lives to sort of cap off the episode and perhaps learn a little bit more about each individual, particularly how they're different, but also about their respective empires. I noticed maybe it doesn't look parallel. Abbasid Caliphate, not Cordoban Caliphate, or rather not the Abbasid or the Caliphate of Abbasid. These are just the two most common ways these are both written, so they happen to not look parallel, but that's just the way things work. I'm trying to go based off the most popular ways of approaching things as well. That's it. Without further ado, we will begin. So the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasid Caliphate, established in 750 CE Common Era, played a significant role in shaping the Islamic world during the medieval period. Therefore, we will seek in the style of perhaps Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, or perhaps Shearer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. We will try to find the rise and fall of each empire to sort of make a parallel structure to compare them all across, but also to maybe have some takeaways today why an empire might rise or fall today. So the Abbasid Caliphate, or Abbasid Empire, was the third caliphate to succeed the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Very important detail. It was founded by a dynasty descended from Muhammad's uncle, Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, lived from 566 to 653 CE. That's Common Era. That's Abbas, therefore Abbasid, from whom the dynasty takes its name. They ruled as caliphs for most of the caliphate from their capital of Baghdad in modern-day Iraq, after having overthrown the Umayyad Caliphate in the Abbasid Revolution. So we covered the Umayyad Caliphate previously, but these do not need to be watched in order. The Abbasid Revolution in 750 CE. The Abbasid Revolution had its origins and first successes in the early region of Khorasan, far from the bases of the Umayyad power in Syria and Iraq, so sort of where the change began. The Abbasid Caliphate first centered its government in Kufa, as we shall see, modern-day Iraq, but in 762, the Caliph al-Mansur founded the city of Baghdad, near the ancient Babylonian capital city of Babylon, and the Persian city of Ctesiphon. Baghdad became the center of science, culture, and invention in what became known as the Golden Age of Islam. This, in addition to housing several key academic institutions, including the House of Wisdom, as well as the multi-ethnic and multi-religious environment, garnered it an international reputation as a center of learning. So maybe in some ways a little different from the empire. So maybe what it's most known for is perhaps the arts and learning, and as we shall see, perhaps architecture too. But nonetheless, they were also able to win in warfare, as we shall see. So that was a brief overview. So starting with the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate from 750 to 800 CE. So the Umayyad Caliphate, which we have previously covered, and its dissatisfaction. The Umayyad Caliphate, which preceded the Abbasids, faced growing discontent among various factions within the Muslim community. Many were dissatisfied with the Umayyad rule, perceiving it as corrupt and favoring Arab tribal elites. Therefore, the Abbasid Revolution began. So the Abbasid Revolution, led by Abu al-Abbas al-Saffah, gained momentum with support from diverse groups, including non-Arab Muslims and disgruntled elements within the Umayyad administration. As for the pivotal battle of the Zab in 750, resulted in the defeat of the Umayyads, and the Abbasids assumed control, marking the official start date of 750 CE, Common Era. As for the transfer of capital, the first Abbasid Caliph, Abu al-Abbas al-Safar, moved the capital from Damascus to the newly founded city of Baghdad in 762 CE. This strategic relocation facilitated governance and trade, contributing to the Caliphate's economic prosperity. So moving the capital sort of changed things up, and it evidently worked for the economy too. As for the Golden Age, so the Golden Age within the Golden Age of Islam, so really an epitome in terms of all civilizations, in fact, in the 8th and 10th centuries. So the Abbasid Caliphate experienced a cultural and scientific golden age during the reigns of Huran al-Rashid, whom we will highlight specifically in a biography, from 786 to 809 CE, or during his reign, pardon me, and his successor al-Mamun from 813 to 833 CE. Baghdad became a center for scholarship, translating works from Greek, Persian, and other languages into Arabic. So not only sort of spreading out their own influence across a massive region, tied for the largest empire we've covered so far, as we shall see, but also absorbing influences from other languages, for example, such as Greek and Persian. So open, so sort of that, confident with their own arts that they can embrace others. But moving to the challenges and the decline, starting in the 9th and 13th centuries, starting with fragmentation, so an internal factor. Internal divisions and regionalism weakened the Abbasid Caliphate. Various provinces gained autonomy, with local rulers exerting control over their territories. So fragmentation, very common amongst empires that we've covered so far as the cause of their decline. Maybe not the leading cause necessarily, but certainly often a leading cause, or at least a cause generally. As for political instability, the Caliphate witnessed a series of weak rulers and power struggles among different factions, leading to political instability. This weakened the central authority and made the Caliphate vulnerable to external threats. So once again, there's external factors and internal factors often feed into each other. As for the Turkish military influence, the Abbasids increasingly relied on Turkish military slaves called Mamluks for maintaining order and protecting the Caliphate, so relying on mercenaries, something that the Prince Machiavelli suggests to the prince in the book The Prince, is to sort of avoid too much reliance on mercenaries, which seem to be at least one of the causes of the declines of the Caliphate, or the Abbasid Caliphate. Over time, these military commanders gained significant power and influence, sometimes even appointing and removing caliphs at will. Pardon me. As for Mongol invasions, so the devastating Mongol invasions in the 13th century led by Hulagu Khan culminated in the sack of Baghdad in 1258. This marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate's political influence and is often considered the symbolic end of the Islamic Golden Age. As for surviving caliphates, however, so that was the official end, we could say, would be 1258, but they continued on for successive caliphs. While the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad fell, other caliphates emerged in Cairo, Egypt, and later in Istanbul, part of the Ottoman Empire. These caliphates claimed spiritual authority, but their political power was limited compared to the earlier Abbasid Caliphate, and its geographic extent was nowhere near what it was. So thus, the Abbasid Caliphate rose to power and amid dissatisfaction with Umayyad rule, flourished culturally and intellectually during its golden age, but eventually succumbed to internal strife, political fragmentation, and external invasions, and also perhaps the risks of relying on mercenaries, particularly the Mongol, also from an external factor, the Mongol onslaught that led to its collapse in 1258. So the Mongols are also a leading cause of their decline. But subsequent caliphates existed from 1261 to 1517, but nowhere near what it was during the official Abbasid Caliphate. So to highlight a specific leader, Caliph Huran al-Rashid, likely the most important of the Abbasid Caliphate. So the Abbasid Caliphate had several significant rulers throughout its history, but one of the most renowned and impactful leaders was Huran al-Rashid. Born in 763 CE, Huran al-Rashid ascended to the throne in 786 and reigned until his death in 809 CE. His rule is often considered as the pinnacle of the Abbasid Caliphate's political and cultural achievements. So his full name, Abu Ja'far Huran ibn Muhammad al-Mahdi, or simply Huran ibn al-Mahdi as well, famously known as Huran al-Rashid, was the fifth Abbasid Caliph of the Abbasid Caliphate, reigning from September 786 until his death in March 809. His reign is traditionally regarded to be the beginning of the Islamic Golden Age. His epithet, al-Rashid, translates to the orthodox, or the just, or the upright, or the rightly guided. So many different, slightly different definitions for it, but all quite noble. So as for his early life, Huran al-Rashid was born in Ray, a city in present-day Iran, during the reign of his father, Caliph al-Mahdi, famous Caliph al-Mahdi himself. He grew up in a well-educated and cultured environment surrounded by scholars, poets, and administrators. So the arts was a big influence on his life, leading to part of his golden age was not necessarily military, but also culturally. But he was exposed to it himself at a young age. Huran received an excellent education, likely the best one could get at the time, and becoming well-versed in literature, philosophy, and Islamic sciences. As for his ascension to the throne, in 786, Huran al-Rashid became the fifth Abbasid Caliph after the death of his brother al-Hadi. So I think it's sort of humble that one's brother is Caliph before them. Not necessarily like it's their choice, but to experience sort of one's peer holding the seat of power, not necessarily expecting one to have it themselves, I think has a little bit of an influence than if one is the first in line, or the first to receive the reins of the children. His reign marked the beginning of the period of what's called the Golden Age of the Abbasid Caliphate after his brother's death. As for his political achievements, with his expansion of the empire, Huran al-Rashid inherited a vast and prosperous empire, but during his reign he continued to expand the Caliphate's territory, maintaining stability and order in various provinces. As we can see, this is tied for the seventh biggest empire we have seen, tied with the Umayyad Empire. I previously said the Umayyad Empire was actually the eighth largest, but I made an error. They're both tied for seventh. We got to tie them for the equal. But maybe, if anything, the Abbasid Caliphate was slightly larger than the Umayyad Caliphate, so maybe it is properly seventh, and Umayyad maybe properly eighth largest empire that we will cover by geographical extent. As for diplomacy and alliances, Huran al-Rashid skillfully navigated diplomatic relations with neighboring states, including the Byzantine Empire and the Tang dynasty of China, both empires which we've covered. If you watched or listened to it, I'm grateful, and if you do, I'd be grateful as well. But these do not need to be watched in chronological order, but it will make sense if you, for example, knew about the Tang dynasty, we can understand sort of their differences in culture and where they might clash, as with the Byzantine Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire. His exchanges with the Byzantine Emperor Charlemagne are particularly famous, as we shall see. As for his administrative reforms, Huran al-Rashid focused on administrative efficiency and justice. He appointed capable officials, and implemented reforms to improve governance and the legal system. So sort of focused on justice, sort of the law, but also efficiency, so sort of a businessman and a lawyer in some sense. As for cultural and intellectual contributions, marking the golden age of his reign, Baghdad's cultural flourishing, Huran al-Rashid is often associated with the vibrant cultural atmosphere of his capital, Baghdad. The city became a center for scholars, poets, and intellectuals, attracting talent from various parts of the Islamic world, over 11.1 million square kilometers, in fact, directly within their territory. As for his patronage of learning, Huran al-Rashid was a patron of learning and scholarship. He established the House of Wisdom, a major intellectual center where scholars translated work from Greek, Persian, and other languages in Arabic. Once again, that's sort of humble that they embrace other sources rather than think theirs is the only source, but also maybe confident that that theirs will not be diminished by embracing other literature. So that is something that Caliph Huran al-Rashid was in favor of, leading to part of it being the golden age of Islam. This effort contributed significantly to the preservation and dissemination of knowledge, so perhaps even by translating these works and retaining these works, maybe some of these works that maybe we have today might have never existed. So grateful for the mutual benefit of culture, of society, or human race, in fact. As for his patronage of learning, Huran al-Rashid was patron of learning and scholarship as well. He established the House of Wisdom, as mentioned, which is tangential. As for his legacy, Huran al-Rashid's rule is immortalized in the tales of 1001 Nights, where he is depicted as a wise and just ruler. Interesting to note that he was supposed to focus on administration, efficiency, and justice, therefore sort of wise and just, the two sides perhaps. However, it's essential to note that the stories in the 1001 Nights, as it's called, are fictionalized and may not accurately represent historical events. Maybe they're exaggerated, or maybe he's put in too positive a light, for example. After Huran al-Rashid's death in 809, the Abbasid Caliphate began to experience internal strife and external threats, ultimately leading to its decline, as mentioned in the history of the rise and fall of the Abbasid Caliphate just previously. Despite the challenges that followed his reign, Huran al-Rashid remains a symbol of the Abbasid Caliphate's cultural and political zenith. But though his predecessor did continue the Golden Age, by marking its zenith, it necessarily says that nobody outdid him following necessarily. So that is the Caliph Huran al-Rashid of the Abbasid Caliphate. We'll now discuss the content of the slide. I think this is some of the more beautiful images we've come, and I think part of it is because we're getting more modern in history. They have more resources in creating art and architecture, but nonetheless, these are, and I think the following slide, as we shall see, are the following empire are two of the most beautiful empires we've covered so far. So the title we have, Caliph Huran al-Rashid of the Abbasid Caliphate, the third caliphate to succeed the Islamic prophet Muhammad. After we have the Rashidun, we have the Umayyad, and then we have the Abbasid Caliphate. And it was founded by the dynasty descended from Muhammad's uncle Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, therefore Abbasid Caliphate. The significant leader we have highlighted was Caliph Abu Ja'far Huran ibn Muhammad al-Mahdi, or Huran al-Rashid. The period was from 750 to 1258 CE, but then there was remaining caliphs sort of within, for example, Egypt and the Ottoman Empire from 1261 to 1517 CE that claimed the authority, but they were nowhere as large as the Caliph from 750, or the Caliphate from 750 to 1258. Modern locations include Iraq, Iran, Syria, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, Bahrain, and Qatar. Million square kilometers, 11.1, so tied 7 and 8 with the Umayyad Empire for the 7th and 8th largest empires we've covered in terms of geographical extent. But we must note that excludes Antarctica, but we also must note that these are very populated regions that they cover, so even more impressive. That's million square miles, 4.29%. But then once again, they are following in the footsteps of the Umayyad Empire, so maybe that the Umayyad Caliphate maybe it was easier to do a second time. But maybe it was slightly larger too. Percent of the world is 8.24%. That's excluding Antarctica and that's the land mass. As for capital, it was Kufa from 750 to 762, Baghdad from 762 to 836. That's 762 to 836, and as well 892 to 1258 after defeat by the Mongols, and Samarra from 836 to 892, and Cairo from 1261 to 1517 were the reigning caliphates. The government was a hereditary caliphate, so sort of something that was created later within the caliphate. So they weren't always hereditary, but became so. As for common languages, classical Arabic was the central and the administrative language, but there were various regional languages, over 11.1 million square kilometers, inevitably different languages and dialects as well. Religion, necessarily Islam, but there were some other people, for example, some Christians and Jewish people in their territory, but necessarily to be part of the Abbasid Caliphate, formally, one would need to be Islamic. As for the population, was likely between 20 and 30 million. So the population of Canada is about 36, maybe 40. California is about 36, maybe 40. So very large, but maybe given the size of the region today, much smaller, but still large enough to have a huge sort of political framework. As for images, in the top left, we have the Huran al-Rashid on the left, receiving a delegation sent by Charlemagne to his court in Baghdad. So this is the first sort of image we have here of Charlemagne, well, a delegation from Charlemagne. So he's not actually in it, but we'll cover Charlemagne soon in his court in Baghdad. So, but I think it's also just a beautiful image. We can see how important he is and how bowing down Charlemagne, or the messengers, seem so desperate. It's just a beautiful image. I really like this style of art. I think it's still called classical. As one might have guessed, I like classical. And it's an 1864 painting by Julius Cockart. To the right and down, we have the spiral minaret of the great mosque of Samarra, its first capital. Beautiful, beautiful building. I'd like to see. Imagine walking up that. Built in 237 AH on the western side of the city of Samarra. As for the siege, to the right of that is the siege of Baghdad by the Mongols, led by Hulagu Khan in 1258, which marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate. Beautiful image there too. And below that we have the madrasa of al-Mustansiriya University in Baghdad, which was established in 1227, just before the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate, one of the few Abbasid-era madrasas to remain, and it is part of the university in Baghdad. So it's amazing how old that is and how beautiful and still functional. As for additional information, we have the history. The Abbasid Revolution, which marked its start, was in 750 CE. That's after the Umayyad Caliphate. The decline of the Abbasids in 861. The death of al-Radi and the beginning of the later Abbasid era from 940 to 1258. The Mongol siege of Baghdad in 1258. And the disestablishment in 1517 CE, officially after the remaining caliphates were disintegrated. It was preceded by the Umayyad Caliphate, but as well the Dubiid dynasty. It was succeeded by the Ottoman Caliphate, the Ottoman Empire, the Mongol Empire, the Emirate of Córdoba, which we will cover soon, the Idrisid dynasty, Ziyarid dynasty, the Shajid dynasty, the Safarid dynasty, the Buyid dynasty, Mamluk, with their mercenaries, and the Sultanate, or the Mamluk Sultanate. In the top right, we have the absolute massive geographical extent of the Abbasid Caliphate. 11.1, approximately as large as the Umayyad, tied for the 7th largest we will cover, and 7th largest in history, that is. We can see the Byzantine Empire up here, the Khazar Khanate, which was led by Khans, the Oghuz Turks, and the Tangs would be over here, whom they communicated with. So that is the Caliph Huran al-Rashid and the Abbasid Caliphate, and we will cover the leader more in comparison after the very important Caliphate of Córdoba. So it's very cool because these sort of really intertwines with the Abbasid Caliphate. So if you're able to watch these side by side, I think it's most ideal, but nonetheless, hopefully it is standalone. It will stand on its own 2 feet by itself. So the Caliphate of Córdoba, or the Emirate of Córdoba as it began, was established in 756 CE and later became a Caliphate of Córdoba in 929 CE, allegedly. And it played a crucial role in the history of the Muslim Spain, or the al-Andalus. And therefore we seek to find a history of its rise and falls. The Andalus, as we shall see, was sort of a descendants of the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain and Portugal. So the Caliphate of Córdoba, or the Cordoban Caliphate, was an Arab Islamic state ruled by the Umayyad dynasty from 929 to the 1031 CE, Common Era. Its territory comprised of Iberia and parts of North Africa, with its capital in Córdoba, as one might have guessed. It succeeded the Emirate of Córdoba, which we will highlight as well, upon the self-proclamation of Umayyad Emir Abd al-Rahman III, whom we will highlight in a specific biography, as Caliph in January of 929, marking it officially as a caliphate. This period was characterized by an expansion of trade and culture, and saw the construction of the masterpieces of al-Andalus architecture. So it's sort of interesting that it sort of in some ways predates the Abbasid Caliphate, but also comes after as well, or it's sort of within as well. So starting with the rise of the Emirate of Córdoba. So what I mean is the Abbasid Caliphate overcame the Umayyad Caliphate, but the Umayyad Caliphate sort of lived on in the Emirate and then later formed the Caliphate of Córdoba. Very short history, but we'll explain this in more detail. So starting with the rise of the Emirate of Córdoba from 756 to 929 CE. So the Umayyad survivors in Iberia. So after the Umayyad Caliphate fell in 750 CE because of, as we saw, the Abbasid Caliphate, remnants of the Umayyad dynasty sought refuge in the Iberian Peninsula, or the al-Andalus, the Iberian Peninsula. Famous side note, Iberian ham is like the champagne of ham. It's the best ham, allegedly. But I don't know if they were necessarily eating ham at the time. In Islam, you're not supposed to eat pork, but I don't know if there's any. Maybe this came later. Side note, nonetheless. As for Abd al-Rahman I, was a surviving member of the Umayyad family, so leading the family, sort of escaping after the Abbasid Caliphate defeated through the revolution in 750 CE, and established himself as the Emir of Córdoba in 756 CE, starting the Emirate of Córdoba. So he sort of fled after the Umayyad Caliphate was defeated, or there was a revolution, and formed his own emirate in Córdoba. As for the establishment of Córdoba as the capital, Abd al-Rahman I faced numerous challenges to consolidate his power. Despite this, he succeeded in establishing Córdoba as the capital of the emirate and began to process centralization and state building. It is unclear whether Abd al-Rahman I proclaimed himself as Caliph. So the start date of it formally as a caliphate could have started with al-Rahman I. But there are documents in the archives of Córdoba that state his first act was upon entering the city was perhaps calling himself Caliphate. However, historically he is recorded as Emir, not Caliph. So he's recorded as Emir. So we say al-Rahman III was the first Caliphate. Abd al-Rahman's seventh descendant, Abd al-Rahman III, would however take up the title formally Caliph, starting the official start date in 929 of the Caliphate properly. So, but the image, however, here we have on the slide is actually of al-Rahman the first, allegedly, because I could not find an image of the third. So, but maybe that, I don't know if that drawing was done at the time. I couldn't even find much about it, but I think that is how we might imagine al-Rahman the third, and the first certainly, and maybe the third as well. They're related, but they're a seventh descendant. The latter is. So as for the golden age of the Caliphate of Córdoba, of the Emirate of Córdoba, from 756 to 976, so sort of into the Caliphate as well, the Emirate of Córdoba experienced a period of prosperity and cultural flourishing under the Umayyad dynasty. Córdoba became a center of learning, science, and the arts. The Great Mosque of Córdoba was constructed during this time, symbolizing the Emirate's architectural and cultural achievements. As for Abd al-Rahman III and the caliphal status, Abd al-Rahman III, who ascended to power in 912 CE, declared himself Caliph in 929 CE. So it took him 18 years to declare himself Caliph, which is sort of interesting. Or 17 years, pardon me, but still, he didn't do it right immediately. So therefore, it's probably unlikely his al-Rahman, his ancestor, was called Caliph if it took him himself, the latter, so long to do it. Asserting the independence of the Emirate from the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. So, independence from the Abbasid Caliphate we had just been covering. So it, as an emirate, was sort of a province of the Caliphate. So now there are two Caliphates, the Caliphate of Córdoba, or in fact even more, but two we are discussing, the Caliphate of Córdoba and the Abbasid Caliphate simultaneously. And this marked the beginning of the Caliphate of Córdoba. As for the apogee and fragmentation from 929 to 1031 CE, the Caliphate of Córdoba under Abd al-Rahman III's reign and his successors, the Caliphate of Córdoba reached its zenith. The economy thrived and the arts and sciences flourished. The Caliphate became one of the wealthiest and most advanced regions in medieval Europe. And as we can see, beautiful, beautiful architecture and art based on this period as well. But inevitably, or not inevitably, but so far, evidence has proved that internal strife often comes to great empires. Despite its outward success, the Caliphate of Córdoba faced internal strife, with regional governors gaining increasing autonomy. This internal fragmentation weakened the central authority and paved the way for external threats. As we can see, they're always feeding into each other. Does internal necessarily come before external? That's impossible to say. Maybe external comes first. But at least in this case, it seems to imply that internal came first. As for the fall of the Caliphate from 1009 to 1031 CE, as for the collapse of the central authority, so the Caliphate of the Córdoba began to unravel in the 11th century. Political instability, economic decline, and power struggles among regional rulers led to the collapse of central authority. As for the fitna of al-Andalus, the 11th century witnessed a period of chaos known as the Fifth al-Andalus, characterized by civil wars, revolts, and the disintegration of the Caliphate into smaller Taifa kingdoms. As for the North African invasion in 1009 CE, the invasion of the North African Berber dynasties, particularly the Almoravids and later the Almohads, further contributed to the fragmentation and the weakened Caliphate, so in North African invasions as well. As for example, Libya and Morocco are very near Spain and Portugal, for example. As for the end of the regions I've been fortunate to visit as well. As for the end of the Caliphate in 1031, the Caliphate of Córdoba officially disintegrated into numerous independent Taifa kingdoms. This marked the end of the centralized Muslim rule in the Iberian Peninsula and the beginning of the Taifa period. That's the Taifa of Córdoba. As for the legacy, despite its ultimate decline, the Emirate and Caliphate of Córdoba left a lasting legacy in the history of the al-Andalus region. Its cultural, scientific, and architectural achievements, as we shall see, continue to influence the region long after its political demise. The convivencia, or coexistence of Muslims, Christians, and Jews during this period is also remembered as a unique aspect of the Emirate's legacy and Caliphate's legacy. So also, despite being very religious, they were also quite tolerant as well. So very, very important empire to cover, albeit not as large as the Abbasid Empire that followed the Umayyad Empire, or revolted, in fact, against the Umayyad Empire. The Caliphate of Córdoba is sort of the descendant of the Umayyads, so it sort of has that same lineage, though. So maybe smaller in territory, but maybe grander in terms of historical length. So as for the biography of Abd al-Rahman III, perhaps the first Caliphate of Córdoba officially called, likely. One of the most significant rulers of the Emirate of Córdoba was Abd al-Rahman III. Born in 891 CE, he ascended to the throne in 912 CE. That's 21 years old he was when he ascended to the throne, so quite young. And played a pivotal role in the transformation of the Emirate into the Caliphate of Córdoba. Therefore, we seek to find a history or biography of his life. So Abd al-Rahman ibn Muhammad ibn Abd Allah ibn Muhammad ibn Abd al-Rahman ibn al-Hakam Abd Rabdi ibn Hisham ibn, and as well Abd al-Rahman al-Dakil. Pardon me for my pronunciation, but those are many of his names. Or simply Abd al-Rahman III was the Umayyad Emir of Córdoba from 912 to 929 CE, while he started as the Emir, and then at which point he founded the Caliphate of Córdoba, serving as its first official caliph until his death. Sort of ceased to be an Emir or subordinate to the Abbasids and sort of claimed independence in a way. Abd al-Rahman won the Lakad, or the sobriquet, or al-Nasir il-Lildan Allah, or the defender of the God's faith, in his early 20s, when he supported the Margawa Berbers in North Africa against the Fatimid expansion, and later claimed the title for caliph himself. So sort of through military conquest, claiming that he was sort of his achievements justified in some ways his rise to become a caliph. But also his lineage also may have evidence that. His half-century reign was known for its religious tolerance as well. So not necessarily something necessarily true for these religious states. As for his early life, starting with his Umayyad lineage, Abd al-Rahman III belonged to the Umayyad dynasty, the remnants of which sought refuge in the al-Andalus, which is in Islamic Spain, after the fall of the Umayyad Caliphate in the east. As for his ascension to the throne in 912 CE, when he was 21 years old, Abd al-Rahman III became the Emir of Córdoba at the age of 21 after the death of his grandfather, Abd Allah. He faced internal strife and challenges from rival factions, but managed to consolidate power. So not necessarily the easiest rise to power, but he suppressed the threats. As for the Caliphate of Córdoba in 929 CE, as for the declaration of the Caliphate in 929, Abd al-Rahman III declared himself Caliph, asserting the independence of the Emirate from the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. So very bold statement. This marked the establishment of the Caliphate of Córdoba and ceased to be an Emirate of Córdoba. As for the Golden Age, Abd al-Rahman III's reign is often regarded as the Golden Age for the al-Andalus. The economy flourished and the Caliphate became the center of learning, culture, and the arts. Córdoba, the capital, was adorned with magnificent palaces, mosques, and gardens. Beautiful architecture, as we shall see, some of the greatest in history. As for his military achievements, Abd al-Rahman III engaged in military campaigns to secure the borders of his realm. He successfully defended against external threats and expanded the territories of the Caliphate. As for his administrative reforms, he centralized the rule, something common amongst more successful leaders we've seen. Haven't yet seen a leader who decentralized across the groups, but nonetheless, centralization seems to be common power towards themselves. Abd al-Rahman III implemented administrative reforms that centralized the government, strengthening the authority of the Caliph. He appointed capable officials and sought to curb the power of regional governors. Sort of, as we can see that in the old regime in the French Revolution by Alexis de Tocqueville, something the French king did to his perhaps fault was he got rid of the aristocrats, sort of his buffer between him and the mob. So maybe a risk he was taking here. So the aristocracy is sort of helps the monarch itself because they're the buffer. They sort of share a mutual benefit. But nonetheless, he seemed to centralize authority, take away from the aristocrats. As for his cultural patronage, the Caliph was a patron of the arts and sciences. He promoted translations of classical Greek, Roman, and Persian works into Arabic, so not only being religiously tolerant, but also culturally tolerant and embracing the ideas of other nations or other peoples, contributing to the intellectual flourishing of the al-Andalus. Maybe that's why its architecture was so great, was because their minds were so open across other ideas. As for his later years and legacy, thanks perhaps to al-Rahman III. As for his later years and legacy, al-Ken II's regency in the latter part of his reign, al-Rahman III entrusted the governance to his son al-Haken II, who served as a regent and later became caliph upon his death in 961. It's often a good way, I believe it was in Blackstone. I saw that as either, I can't remember. I think it was Blackstone that not sure. The transition of power is often good if it is done sort of within the lifetime of the regent, so it's not a sudden surprise. Actually, I believe that's given decline and fall of the Roman Empire. That's it. It was good for an emperor to elect and have the new emperor working while the old emperor is still in power, or while he's still alive, so sort of transition and not sort of a sudden change. Pardon me, not Blackstone, but I am reading the commentaries of the laws of England, but that was given decline and fall of the Roman Empire. As further back to al-Rahman III, cultural and architectural legacy, Abd al-Rahman III left a lasting impact on the Andalus through the construction of architectural marvels, as we shall see, including the Medina Azara Palace complex near Córdoba. His support for education and the arts contributed to the cultural vibrancy of his realm. As for political stability, also during his time under his rule, the Caliphate of Córdoba achieved a level of political stability and cultural sophistication that stood out in the medieval world. After Abd al-Rahman III's death in 961, his successors faced internal strife, leading to the eventual fragmentation and decline of the Caliphate of Córdoba in the 11th century CE. Despite the challenges that followed his reign, Abd al-Rahman III is remembered as one of the most important and influential rulers in the history of the al-Andalus. So perhaps he was the zenith. Those who followed him may not have been as great, but he did form the Caliphate, which is a huge achievement. Also, he was religiously tolerant and also brought in ideas from other peoples as well. So that is the Caliph Abd al-Rahman III and the Caliphate of Córdoba. We will now highlight the content of the slide. So once again, the title is Caliph Abd al-Rahman III and the Caliphate of Córdoba. They're the constructors of the masterpieces of the al-Andalus architecture, and they succeeded the Emirate of Córdoba. And also, maybe I'll add, claimed independence from the Abbasid Caliphate by forming a caliphate of their own. So significant leader, pardon the boldingness, it should not be bolded text for the name, but nonetheless, it's Caliph Abd al-Rahman III. The empire was Caliphate of Córdoba. The period was from 756 to 929, it was an emirate, and from 929 to 1031, it was a caliphate. This is a common era. Modern locations include Portugal and Spain. Million square kilometers, 0.6. Million square miles, 0.23%. of the world, 0.45. Much smaller than the Abbasid or the Umayyad Caliphate, but larger than, for example, Sparta or Athens. So it's still quite large. The capital city was Córdoba, of course. Government, theocratic monarchy. Common languages, so monarchy with divine right, and later a caliphate as well. Common languages, Andalusi Arabic, Andalusi Romance, Berber languages, and medieval Hebrew. Religion was Islam, which was the official and the majority religion, but they also embraced Christianity and Judaism. The population was likely between 5 and 7 million. So despite the region being smaller, the population is almost maybe approximately a quarter of that of the Abbasid Caliphate. So maybe not that much smaller even, despite maybe being quite a bit smaller in terms of geographical extent. Still, it's a very populated region. Our calculation does exclude Antarctica and the oceans and the seas, but nonetheless, it's a populated region that they ruled over, and they sort of maintained the Umayyad Caliphate, but also the fact that they claimed independence from the Abbasids pretty much without significant repercussions is also very impressive. So in terms of images, in the top left we have a portrait of Abd al-Rahman I. Unfortunately, I could not find an image of al-Rahman III, but nonetheless I imagine they look somewhat similar. And furthermore, al-Rahman III was the one who founded, may have been the first official one to call himself the Caliphate anyways. To the right of that, we have Manuel Gomez Moreno Gonzalez's 19th century depiction of Muhammad the 12th's family in the Alhambra moments after the fall of Granada. It's a beautiful scene there. As we can also see the architecture. I love the lighting. It's absolutely just beautiful. Really get a feel for the time. They had obviously no electricity. Just absolutely beautiful painting. I can't even put it into words. To the right of that, the Court of the Lions in the Alhambra, the Palace of Nasrid in Granada. So this is a place I have been to, Granada as well. Very beautiful place in Spain. And look at that architecture. Absolutely. They're one of the first lines they have so many achievements, but one of the biggest achievements they have is the constructors of the masterpieces of the al-Andalus architecture. And it really is. I recommend anyone visits Granada, for example. Below that is the Andalusian physician Abul Qasim al-Zawrawi, who performed the first modern surgery, determined how to remove kidney stones, and was the father of surgery and developed many inventions and instruments. So that was during this time, you can see, and also quite a beautiful painting as well, but also maybe more important for its scientific merit, and also shows the science of the Caliphate of Córdoba, or the Emirate of Córdoba as well. As for to the right of that, we have the clothing of the al-Andalus, as suggested at the time in the 15th century during the Emirate of Granada. So a little period later, but maybe their clothing was quite similar. Below that, we have Abd al-Rahman III, an image of him himself, but it was too small to be as our main image of him himself, for example, even if we blew it up, receiving Ambassador John Gores of the Otto I the Great at the Medina Azahara by Dionisio Baizeras Verdaguer painting in 1885. Another beautiful painting. So we can see that same beautiful architecture as well, and sort of just the holiness, sort of that theocratic monarch element. And to the right of that, we have the interior of the Mosque Cathedral of Córdoba, the former great mosque built by Abd al-Rahman I, as we have the image of him, in 785, and later expanded by his successors. So let's think about how old that is, how beautiful it is, and really see the masterpieces of the al-Andalus architecture. And probably because they were religiously tolerant and open to other ideas too. They even embraced learning from other people. So very, I'd say, beautiful empire. So as for the comparison between Huran al-Rashid of the Abbasid Caliphate and Abd al-Rahman III of the Caliphate of Córdoba. So Huran al-Rashid of the Abbasid Caliphate, and and we have the map. Sorry, and we also have these images. So it was preceded by the Umayyad Caliphate. We're going back to the Caliphate of Córdoba, sorry to jump around, and it was succeeded by the Caliphate of Córdoba. And then we have the Caliphate of Córdoba. It was preceded by the Emirate of Córdoba and the Idrisid dynasty, claiming some territory. And the Caliphate of Córdoba was succeeded by the Taifa of Córdoba, as we saw, the Taifa of Danaya, so it's split up into Taifas, the Taifa of Zaragoza, the Taifa of Badajoz, the Taifa of Toledo, the Taifa of Valencia, and the Almoravid dynasty. So those were the successor states of the Caliphate of Córdoba. And in the top right, we have the map. As we can see, there's the Emirate of Necor there, Zena tribes, the Kingdom of Leon. There's their large area of land there, all the way up to the county of Barcelona, for example. And there's Córdoba, the capital. So, pardon me, back to the comparison between Huran al-Rashid of the Abbasid Caliphate and Abd al-Rahman III of the Caliphate of Córdoba were two prominent leaders of the Islamic world who lived during roughly the same period. While their realms were geographically distinct, there are noteworthy similarities and differences during their reign. So not only did they live during the same time, that's one particular reason that makes them a good comparison, but also they're both of the Islamic sort of caliphates, or one was the former of a caliphate and the other was sort of a caliph within one. So as for their similarities, their golden age patronage, Harun al-Rashid is associated with the Abbasid Golden Age, maybe the Golden Age of the Golden Age, a period of cultural, intellectual, and economic flourishing. He was a patron of the arts, literature, and scholarship, fostering the development of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. As for Abd al-Rahman III, similarly, Abd al-Rahman III presided over the cultural renaissance in the al-Andalus. Córdoba became a major center for learning, attracting scholars from various disciplines. Abd al-Rahman III was known for his patronage of the arts and sciences. So very similar in that regard. They're both very big patronage of the arts, maybe more so the humanities on the Huran al-Rashid side, and maybe more on the sciences with Abd al-Rahman III, but nonetheless maybe a little bit more on the architecture side on al-Rahman III, and perhaps maybe more on the legal side with Huran al-Rashid, but nonetheless they're both very scholarly and very open to ideas and really embraced it within both of their respective empires. As for their cultural contributions, Huran al-Rashid contributed to the architectural splendor of Baghdad with notable constructions during his reign. Abd al-Rahman III's architectural legacy includes the construction of Medina as a Hara Palace complex, showcasing his commitment to urban development. I think by a slight margin, Abd al-Rahman III is maybe more recognized for his architecture, but maybe it's because Huran al-Rashid's other achievements are greater than his architectural achievements, and he's less identified for his architectural achievements. But at least on architecture alone, Abd al-Rahman III is relatively more recognized for his architecture, all else being equal. As for their relative centralized rule, Huran al-Rashid aimed for centralized administration and worked to ensure the supremacy of the Abbasid Caliphate, whereas Abd al-Rahman III implemented administrative reforms that centralized the governance in the Caliphate of Córdoba, reducing the autonomy of regional governors. So both of them focused on centralizing their power, which seems to be common across lots of powerful empires. As for their differences, their geographical location, Huran al-Rashid ruled over the Abbasid Caliphate, which covered a vast area including parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and Persia, might add larger at 11.1 million square kilometers. Abd al-Rahman III governed the Caliphate of Córdoba, situated on the Iberian Peninsula, technically in Europe, the al-Andalus, with a distinct cultural and historical context, albeit much longer, 0.6 million square kilometers, so much smaller, but in perhaps entirely different continents. As for another difference, the political structure, Huran al-Rashid was part of the Abbasid Caliphate, a centralized Islamic state with a caliph as its supreme leader. His rule was during the later years of the Abbasid Golden Age, or maybe starting it, as other scholars have said. As Abd al-Rahman III declared the independence of the Caliphate of Córdoba from the Abbasid Caliphate, establishing a separate political entity. So while Huran al-Rashid may have came to power in a more powerful empire, Abd al-Rahman III sort of made his own. He claimed independence from the Abbasid Caliphate. So there's that, even that interaction that Abd al-Rahman III claimed independence from the Abbasid Caliphate. As for their dynastic background, Huran al-Rashid was a member of the Abbasid dynasty, and he ascended to the Caliphate as part of the broader Umayyad Abbasid transition. So it was wasn't much of a struggle for him to come to power. Whereas Abd al-Rahman III belonged to the Umayyad dynasty, with his rule contributing to the establishment of the consolidation of the Umayyad Caliphate of Córdoba. But he too has this royal lineage that dates back even before the Abbasid dynasty, because the Umayyad dynasty came before, so maybe even a greater lineage, but nonetheless he was coming into power as an emirate, not as a caliphate. The caliphate title he himself allegedly claimed. Some say maybe it was his ancestor, al-Rahman the First, but most scholars concur that it was al-Rahman III who claimed himself the caliph, and the Córdoba a caliphate. As for their military campaigns, Huran al-Rashid engaged in military campaigns to defend and expand Abbasid's territories. Abd al-Rahman III also involved in military campaigns to secure the borders of al-Andalus and protect the caliphate from external threats. So it seems to be Huran al-Rashid may have been relatively more offensive, and al-Rahman III was relatively more defensive, but that could have been by virtue of their circumstances, not necessarily by their choice. And maybe if they had switched places, they might have acted differently, or performed more defensively or less defensively, respectively. While Huran al-Rashid and Abd al-Rahman III ruled in different regions and contexts, both left a lasting legacy in the history of the Islamic world, contributing to periods of cultural and intellectual brilliance in their respective domains. So that's the comparison between al-Rashid and Abd al-Rahman III of the Abbasid Caliphate and the Caliphate of Córdoba, respectively. Thank you very much for watching this episode. My apologies for the couple bouncing around a little bit and drinking a cup of water. My throat was a little dry, but nonetheless, I'm very grateful for your support. This is Ages of Empires. My name is Kalen Ashcroft, and if you continue to support, like or subscribe, I'd be very, very grateful. Thank you so much.